GDC has been happening over the last week or two. A bunch of the top developers in the world all gather together. They share their insights in development. They show little presentations of how they made certain things. It's actually really, really cool. If you just look up on YouTube, different GDC talks, and you can actually watch them yourself. And you get to see all the behind the scenes of how these games are made, some of the design decisions that went into it. There's fascinating insights to be garnered as a result of it. It's really, really cool. And with this, Sven Vink, I'm not sure, but the head of Larian, he came in and during his talk at GDC, basically just put all the rumors about DLC for Baldur's Gate 3 and rumors about them doing a Baldur's Gate 4 to rest. And he came out and basically just was like, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. What's interesting though, is that he elaborated on it a little bit more. Counter expectations, but I've never been more sure about a strategy shift. This is the right thing for Larian. I understand there will be disappointment because people fell in love with what we created, but it was a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, and it doesn't need more. Thank you for the super chat. Just a second. I'll get to that in just a second. The team has grown a lot during Baldur's Gate 3, and I think you can be very excited for what that growth means for our next game. As for Baldur's Gate 3 and its characters, they now belong to Wizards of the Coast, and I think they understand how important they are for the community, and I trust they'll be treated with respect. It's not easy for us to say goodbye to them, but we also knew from the get-go we'd have to one day, I think, leave or do something else one day. We learned a lot from creating them, and I'm very eager to see those lessons applied to new characters. Also, we're not done with updating Baldur's Gate 3. There's still a bunch of stuff coming, like mod support and extra cinematics for some of the endings, just not new content. Now, naturally, there's a little sadness. There's a little sadness because it's a Baldur's Gate 4 would be amazing. They did all this work to make a D&D 5e system work in a video game, and it's amazing. It's crazy in depth, and it's just baffling it even runs at all. It's so cool. The game is amazing. And a lot of us were hoping either for a sequel or maybe for a little bit of a DLC campaign or something that adds maybe a new area, maybe a new act or something. I don't know how they would do it, but a lot of us were kind of sitting back hoping maybe, just maybe. But they've come out and just been nope, we're just not going to do it. And I can respect it. It's a bold move to drop one of the most highly praised games of the last decade and then be yeah, and we're not going to milk it for DLC, and we're not going to do another big a sequel where it's just this game again, but maybe tweaked with new graphics and a different story, but it's basically the same game, but everybody's going to buy it in droves because we released the greatest reviewed game of all time last time. It would have been so easy for them to continue milking this, and they've chosen not to. Now, there's some very legitimate business reasons for it as well. They have to pay licensing fees if they do another Baldur's Gate game because it's owned as an IP by Wizards of the Coast. And we saw those Insomniac leaks where we found out how much Disney charges for selling the rights to Marvel IP. And while it's not going to be that aggressive, I don't think, to get access to Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast is still taking a cut of every sale of Baldur's Gate 3 because it uses the Dungeons and Dragons, not just IP, but also game systems as well. So for them to pivot off and just be yeah, we're going to make a really robust and vast RPG with our own systems and mechanics, but using what we learned from this game. And that also gives them a lot of freedom to write their own story, write their own universe. I can respect it. I can respect it. It's like the heavyweight boxer winning the championship and then retiring right then and there, or the athlete that wins the Super Bowl and then retires right after getting the MVP. Even though he could keep playing, he could keep pushing it, decides to step away, when they're at the peak, when they're at the very top, instead of continuing to just try to milk something for all it's worth. Kind of cascading questions are is there a Baldur's Gate 4 from another team? Does Wizards of the Coast go and hire somebody else to try and make Baldur's Gate 4? I think that's a terrible idea, frankly. I can't imagine that goes well. There's a lot of questions does Wizards of the Coast have access to the source code from the development of Baldur's Gate 3? I can't imagine they do, so they basically be developing from scratch the sequel. So I doubt that they do anything like that. Maybe we get Baldur's Gate 4 eventually in another 10, 20 years or something, but I doubt that we actually see anything. How long until Wizards of the Coast licenses the Baldur's Gate 3 characters to be in Fortnite? Have they ever done any Wizards of the Coast IP in Fortnite? I don't think they have yet, but maybe eventually. It's a layup. They're bringing can you imagine Call of Duty Can you imagine Call of Duty? You have like a Shadowheart skin in Call of Duty and a Gale and a Asterion skin in Call of Duty. Maybe. I doubt there's a lot of crossover within those communities. But so yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But apparently they started, like, there were some rumors that they had started working on a DLC for Baldur's Gate 3. They were kind of doing the early building and testing and ideation. And then they looked at it all and just decided, nope, we're just not really in it. Our hearts aren't in it. And they decided to pivot off and do this instead. And I can respect it. I mean, more power to them. More power to them. Deciding to go and leave while they're ahead and do something else, that's pretty impressive. And now, you know, they made a ton of money from Baldur's Gate 3. They're going to work on whatever the next game is for a while. My question is, and maybe he's answered this, but Baldur's Gate 3 was in early access for a long time, like 2 or 3 years, I think. So you could play through the first act for a while. And granted, it was like super buggy and there was a lot of things that were like broken and that would change when the full game would eventually release. But it was in early access and they got a lot of player feedback from that. So I'm wondering if they go and like if they're going to do an early access kind of thing for their next game as well. Do they work on it for a couple years or a few years and then announce it, put it in early access, and then, you know, it's another 3 years after that we get the full game? I don't know, but I think Baldur's Gate 3 showed some of the perks of doing that. You get the player feedback, you get them kind of building a community before the game's even out, and when the game fully launches, there's another wave of interest that comes from it. And you can just ride that wave to buku bucks, as we saw with Baldur's Gate 3. So maybe they do that. I don't know, but it's really, really cool to see them doing the opposite of kind of the standard of the industry, which would be, okay, we have a hit in the form of Baldur's Gate 3. Great. We're going to make 7 more and a mobile game spinoff. And we're going to do this, this, and this, and then a TV show and then a movie, you know, 6 seasons and a movie. But instead they're like, nope, we're at the top and we're going to go out while we're at the top. You know, he did confirm it in an interview. The next game will have early access again. Well, there you go. So I guess they probably do like 2 or 3 years of working on it and then they pivot off and we'll announce early access, get some feedback, and then start working on it. So that's crazy. He took my thing.